Oscar Piastri didn't say much after stepping out of the car. He didn't need to. Because by the time the final sector lit up green, everyone in the paddock was already watching. The McLaren hadn't made headlines all week. No long runs. No push laps. No visible upgrades. It just sat there. Quiet. Stable. Until day 5. Until Piastri strapped in. And something changed. He wasn't fighting the car. He wasn't adjusting mid-corner. The MCL40 looked calm. Too calm for a car that wasn't supposed to be ready yet. And when the timing screen blinked, 1 minute and 17.4 seconds, medium compound, full fuel. The garages didn't react. They paused. Then leaned in. Because this wasn't McLaren at full power. And that is what made it scary. 5 days of preseason testing. 20 cars on track. No official timesheets. No real winners. At least, not publicly. Barcelona wasn't about results. It was about data. Mileage. Systems checks. Tire windows. And while teams like Ferrari and Mercedes made statements, McLaren stayed quiet. No low-fuel runs. No soft-tire glory laps. They focused on consistency. Outlap, install lap, long run. Same tire compound. Same fuel load. Almost every day. It wasn't eye-catching. Not until the final session. Oscar Piastri's name hadn't been on anyone's watch list. Most assumed Norris would lead the McLaren program. He had more experience. More data. More authority in setup direction. But Piastri kept logging clean laps. No lockups. No complaints over the radio. No headline times. But no visible weaknesses either. By day 4, McLaren had quietly logged over 300 laps. Not the highest mileage, but enough to know where the car stood. And then on day 5, without any change in tone, they released the MCL40 on a push stint. Medium compound. Heavy fuel. No DRS activation. And Oscar Piastri delivered something no one had forecasted. It wasn't raw speed. It was composure. Efficiency. A lap that looked controlled and complete. Which made the garages stop what they were doing. Because McLaren hadn't looked ready. And suddenly, they looked ahead of schedule. The lap didn't trigger applause. No cheers from the garage. No radio celebration. But inside the McLaren pit wall, you could feel it. They already knew. 1 minute and 17.4 seconds on mediums. But the stopwatch wasn't the point. It was the car's behavior. The way it entered corners with no hesitation. No snap. No rotation delay. It wasn't twitchy like last year's car. It wasn't heavy either. It just looked correct. In every frame, Piastri's inputs were minimal. Hands steady. Pedal modulation smooth. That kind of lap doesn't happen by accident. Not this early in testing. Not without serious underlying balance. And that's what made rival engineers uncomfortable. Because based on public data, the MCL40 shouldn't be here yet. McLaren was still late on parts. Still catching up on mileage. Still working through ride height issues earlier in the week. So how does a car with no full simulation laps suddenly deliver clean sector deltas? Some thought it was a setup fluke. Others whispered about underweight runs. But telemetry from GPS overlays didn't back that up. Piastri's braking points were conservative. His exits weren't aggressive. There was time left on the table. And yet the car still delivered. Stable under load. Precise in direction change. Responsive, but never unpredictable. Which brings us to the question no one could answer. If this wasn't a push lap, then what was it? On the surface, the MCL40 is an evolution. Revised floor, repackaged side pods, smaller rear wing. It's what everyone expected. Small changes, refinements. But that doesn't explain the behavior. Because the way this car responds to weight transfer, especially on entry, feels different. More composed, more reactive, but without aggression. That's not just setup. That's geometry. Sources around the paddock began looking deeper. Not at lap times, but at pitch stability. And what they found was strange. The car didn't dip, didn't bounce, didn't oscillate under braking. It stayed neutral, even under heavier loads. That's when whispers started. Was McLaren hiding a new suspension concept? A subtle reinterpretation of anti-dive? Or something in the floor that reduced load variation? Nobody could confirm it. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a car that was working well. It was a car behaving as if the design itself had shifted philosophy. More linear, more forgiving, built for stability under variable conditions. And that would explain why Piastri looked completely at ease, without needing to extract every tenth. Because if the MCL40 has genuinely become predictable across multiple stints and loads, then it's not just fast, it's usable. And for a midfield team trying to break into the top three, that's more dangerous than a single lap on soft tires ever could be. After Piastri's lap, McLaren didn't brief the media. No data sheets. No quotes from Andrea Stella. Not even a tire compound confirmation. Just quiet smiles in the garage. And a closed laptop. That's unusual. Especially for a team trying to build momentum. Most would capitalize. Frame the lap as validation. Control the narrative. But McLaren didn't push the story. They let the numbers sit. That's when engineers from other teams started pulling sector overlays. And the more they studied them, the more questions came up. Piastri's entry speed into turn 4 unusually high. Turn 7 no lift. Turn 9 neutral balance. These aren't traits of a car being dialed in. These are traits of a car that's already found its platform. Which leads to a deeper concern. If McLaren already has balance across fuel loads, without setup drama, then their development window opens wide. They can begin focusing on aero upgrades, on efficiency, on incremental gains. Meanwhile, the others, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston, are still searching for consistency, still trying to find their baseline. But here's the most curious part. Even Norris hasn't said much. He praised the team, said things felt good, then moved on. No comparisons, no expectations. Just the same tone Piastri used, which suggests something else. McLaren might know exactly what they've built. And the last thing they want is for anyone else to realize it before Bahrain. Oscar Piastri wasn't expected to lead this story. Not yet. Not in year 2. He was meant to build quietly, support Norris, grow into the role. But when the stopwatch froze on that 1 minute and 17.4 seconds, that dynamic shifted. Because no one hands you a balanced car in testing unless you've earned the team's trust. And no driver delivers that clean a lap without understanding what the car actually needs. So now the paddock isn't just asking, how good is the MCL40? They're asking something else. How ready is Piastri? That's a problem for the rest of the grid. Because if McLaren has 2 drivers capable of extracting top-tier pace on different run plans. Then they can split strategies. Experiment under pressure. Double threat every weekend. And suddenly, Piastri's no longer a long-term investment. He's an active factor. Right now. For Norris, that adds friction. Not conflict yet, but the kind of internal pressure that can quietly affect development direction. Who gets the newer floor first? Who gets the overnight SIN data priority? Who sets the baseline? It also complicates the constructors' fight, because McLaren might not be fighting for P4 anymore. If this car delivers in Bahrain, on a hotter, faster track, they could threaten Ferrari, even pressure Mercedes, especially if the car's advantage isn't just speed, but how quickly it gets into a usable setup window. Because every race they start dialed in is one less race lost to guesswork. And in a calendar this long, those margins add up fast. Which brings us back to Piastri and what this lap means for him. If he continues on this trajectory, he doesn't become Norris's shadow. He becomes the headline. McLaren hasn't confirmed anything. Not their pace. Not their fuel loads. Not even their intentions. They left Barcelona without noise. Without claims. Without a single word about lap times. And that silence might be the loudest thing they've said. Because the paddock knows what they saw. They saw a car that didn't need correction. Didn't need drama. Just track time. They saw a young driver, in only his second full season, handling a top 4 chassis, like he's been doing it for a decade. And they saw a team that didn't flinch when the stopwatch told a different story than the preseason narrative. Bahrain is next. Different conditions. Different demands. Longer corners. Hotter surface. Heavier tire wear. That's where setups begin to unravel. That's where balance becomes survival. And if the MCL40 stays composed there, if it continues to do what it did in Barcelona, then we're not looking at an early surprise. We're looking at a new player in the fight at the front. Not in a year. Not with upgrades. Now. And that's the part no one's saying out loud yet. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't McLaren showing off. Maybe they were just getting started.